And here's Nicole.
Woo!
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is a new forum for me. I like it.
It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. I might just welcome everybody and give a brief introduction for you, Nicole. So yes, welcome everybody. My name's Sally Armitage. I lead media and comms at the Global Evergreening Alliance. And if you're just joining now, you've arrived in our live chat for our book club. This time it has been this fantastic book, For the Love of Soil, written by Nicole Masters, who's joined us. And this is extremely well timed because it's Soil Day on Saturday. So to introduce Nicole, and I'm going to read a bit of this to make sure I don't get it wrong, Nicole, so correct me as we go along. But Nicole Masters, I'll do my best. She's an agroecologist. Clearly, she's an author. She's also an educator. She has a background in ecology, soil science, and organisational learning studies as well. She's the director of Integrity Soils, where she has a team of soil coaches who work with producers in the States and Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Originally, Nicole is from New Zealand, and she's an outspoken, no-nonsense champion of our underground livestock. She's also, amazingly, an alien of extraordinary ability. True story. And
True story.
True story. And she's joining us today from the States, where she's currently living with her horse. And I hope that we'll have time to come back and talk about your horse, Nicole, because I think there's a really good story there. But to start us off, do you think maybe, I mentioned in your introduction that you're an agroecologist.
Mm-hmm.
What is that, and why are you one?
So it sounds like an agroecologist is someone who's angry about ecology, but that's not what it means. So an agroecologist means we look at agricultural systems from an ecological viewpoint. So I have a background as an ecologist. I majored in soil science, and for the last 22 years I've been working in agriculture. So really looking at the networks and the connectivity from soil, water, root systems, plants, animals, and humans. Oh, and also the climate. So how does that all kind of interact together? So it's an incredibly, I guess, complex science, but it's and also on the other side of it, it's also an incredibly intuitive, heartfelt science as well, which is what I quite like about it. So it really includes the social elements. Anyway, that's it. That's in a little box. I could talk about it all day.
Good. Can you talk about it for 45 minutes?
I don't know if everyone would be interested in that, but yeah.
Why soil for you though? What was it? Where's this come from?
I think it's always been there. Like I can't think of a time where I don't have memories of soil, you know, from I guess my grandparents or my parents' gardens, or being obsessed with my uncle's like sheep properties or dairy, just, you know, loving animals, loving the soil. And but yeah, when I was 5, Mount St. Helens erupted, and that had quite a big impact on me as a 5-year-old. Like my grandmother had subscribed me to National Geographic, and I was just obsessed with not only the power of the earth, but then that whole recovery process and how quickly nature actually came back in. And so yeah, I might have been a really weird child, maybe. I don't know. Just it's always been what's interested me.
Well, it's ended up well. I was going to ask you why you then decided to write like an entire book about how much you love soil. I said in your introduction that you're an educator, and I think probably like looking at this book, there's so many stories in here about the people you work with and the people who've inspired you, and stories of from a lot of your clients as well, and the relationships that you have with them. Is that why you wanted this book, to document all of this, or as a resource for other people to do the same? Because there's a big emphasis on mentoring in your book too.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I feel apologetic to a lot of my clients that they ended up in the book. You know, they all got to read it and tick it off, but you know, it really puts people in a vulnerable place. And as a writer, you have to be vulnerable because you've got to be willing to share what you really think and care about and put out into the world. And actually, that might change next week, and suddenly you've got like this line in the sand where you can't change anymore. And I think that that's quite scary. But you know, I have a lot of really good technical books on regenerative agriculture and soil science that I like, I love, but they're reference books, and so from my education background, we know that if you really want to move people and you really want to retain information, we do that through stories, and that is from time immortal. I mean, we transferred learning and through, I guess, our elders, or learning before there was any written language. It was all through our oral histories, and so storytelling is something I'm quite passionate about, and knew that to convey these quite complex ideas, it needed to be in a story format. So yeah, unfortunately, people I know became the characters in that, whether or not they particularly wanted to be. Yeah, and one of them, he's like, my witness protection program's blowing. I'm like, sorry about it. Yeah.
Oh, well, there's actually, there is a lot of hard science in here as well. And I think that for someone like me, without a scientific background, it's the stories that carry you through and
Yeah.
help you to understand all of the hard facts that you've got in here. But,
Mm.
but you self-published as well. Why did you
Hmm.
self-publish?
I did actually, I had a publisher that I'd started to work with and have these conversations with, and they wanted me to take all the personal voice out and all of and like the first line of the book is, I'm not normal. And it's a line I get a lot of feedback from people going, oh, we're not normal either. And they wanted me to remove that. They wanted me to take anything out to do with, yeah, what I felt like was all the more heart stuff. They wanted it really technical, and so we just didn't see eye to eye. Um, and then I just kind of realized like so much of the world is online now, and we are also connected, that a publisher wasn't going to achieve more than what we could in having conversations like this, or sharing stuff. And I felt like if the book was worth getting out, then it would naturally do that. And I felt like, yeah, after I read it, like you always, there's all this anxiety and unsurety, I guess, if you when you write something and put it out. But then when I read it on audiobook to do the recording, by the time I finished, I was like, actually, this is a really good book. I'm really, really happy with it and how it's come across. So that was kind of nice for my internal, you know, not being good enough, all that kind of stuff that we all do to ourselves. So yeah, so self-publishing in this day and age, I think, is actually more successful than using a big brand publisher, unless you're already well known. I mean, unless you're already, I don't know, Clive Cussler or something, then actually the indie publishing is much easier. Yeah,
Super cool that you did the recording yourself too.
yeah, that was
You'd have
fun.
you'd have seen it from a whole other angle.
Yeah, yeah, you kind of see it from a bird's eye view, and I think that's because, yeah, it's hard to read your own stuff after a while, especially when you've done the editing, and yeah, so to just kind of read it through, it's like, oh yeah, cool.
Well,
Yeah.
for anyone who's just joined, we're here with Nicole Masters talking about her book, For the Love of Soil, which, you know, perfectly timed because International Soil Day on Saturday. Nicole, I wanted to ask you about the language that you've used and some of the pictures that you've painted, because um, you know, usually if you're trying to get people to take care of something or promote something, we kind of give it a bit of a warm and fuzzy feeling. But quite often I didn't get a warm and fuzzy feeling in here, especially when I was reading the section on the underground livestock as well. So you kind of, when we read Judith Schwartz's book last time, she was talking about the yuccosphere in the earth. So she was already talking about things that were icky. But then reading through your book, when I got to the protists, like reading about the protists and them absorbing each other, next to the paragraph, all I've written is "oh crumbs" and an exclamation mark. And if I read one bit that you wrote, it says, if we had the equipment to listen into the soil ecosystem, it might sound like wild chatter and blood-curdling screams. Many of the organisms in soil make great subject matter for a horror movie. So you've kind of gone with the opposite of warm and fuzzy.
Yes. And I think, I mean, I have this secret that I love zombie movies. I'm a big zombie fan. Like, and there are organisms in the soil that take over each other like zombies. So they'll actually control the brains. There's a fungus that'll do that in insects and actually make that insect move and go where it wants it to do. And then these mushrooms basically just explode out this insect's body and then take over the whole colony. And I mean, I love stuff like that. Like, there's something that just I totally geek out about. And I think you think of like that movie Aliens, where the thing pops out the chest. There's an organism in the soil that will do that. And there's the vampire amoeba, so they actually come along, jab into the membrane, and then suck all the intracellular fluid out of another organism. I mean, it's so cool. Yeah, so I think I love the soil, but I don't think I'd want to live in there. Like, yeah, it's quite scary.
Well, do all of these images kind of help when you're talking to farmers and ranchers? Because you talk to them about, their livestock above ground, but then you talk to them about their underground livestock, you call them, which are all these creatures that are doing some appalling things, but that have great outcomes for us, though. Does it help?
Oh, I think it definitely does, because, and I think an Australian said this once to me, you got livestock, you got dead stock. And I was like, whoa, that's quite profound. And it really made me realize, if you don't understand that underground livestock, what they need to feed, what they need for water, or, what they need to survive, then you don't know how to look after them. So we need to really think about these different organisms in terms of they are our livestock, and who am I feeding right now? And that can change through the season depending on how high your grass is, or your stock density, or the herbicides or fungicides you're using. Like, who am I feeding or not feeding right now? And then how that has an influence on ultimately your outcomes and your profitability. So yeah, I'm quite passionate that we understand our livestock.
And the other thing that I found really interesting when I was reading the book was the links that you were making between humans and the soil, but links that I hadn't ever thought about before. So to do with gut health, to do with antibiotics even. And then when you were writing about Dr. Stark and his preventative medicine that he uses for humans, but you apply that to soil. So you were kind of like closing the gap between humans and soil.
Yeah, well, it's where we came from, and I think and where we ultimately end up. But there's so much. I mean, guess at the end of the day, everything comes back to soil. But you think about gut microorganisms now, and how they're saying, 100% of immunological disorders in the human body come back to gut health. Can you hear that whistling sound? Is that with you?
I think a fire truck just went past.
Fire truck, that's all right. I was like, your children are bigger than that.
That's true.
Yeah, so, we have more microbiology in the human body than we do our own cells, and many of these organisms came from soil. And, it's what we breathe. There's something called the farm effect, having exposure to things like soil and cats and dogs and horses and all of that when you're young sets up your immune system for life. But a lot of, the more that I've deepened my experience with soil, the more I've realized that there is no separation in terms of I spend time with the farmers, and it gives me insights into what's happening with their soil before I even get out there, you know, and especially if there's health issues, even mental health issues, that's actually reflected in what's happening with their soil and their livestock. And so that's been quite an interesting journey for me, is just deepening that, you know, and I think the more that people, if you know a lot about human nutrition, it actually gives you great insights into what's happening in terms of soil and plant nutrition as well. There's just, there's so much similarities, and it's not surprising. I mean, we have all these microbes in our bodies. It's no wonder that, yeah, there's like a reflection or a mirror.
Is this something that it's easy for farmers and ranchers to get their heads around when you're talking about how close the relationship is between soil health and their health?
I think it can give you an inroad. I mean, you know, they're looking at developing a vaccine for PTSD, which comes from a type of bacteria. So actually, this vaccine would be something that early responders would be immunized with, and it would help your body deal with stress. And it's like, there's so many of these medical advancements are coming from soil microbiology. So you think 90% of the serotonin, so our happy hormone that's made in the gut, is made by bacteria. So if you have an imbalance with what you're eating, if you're really, really stressed, there's all sorts of things that influence that gut microbiome, and then you are out maybe in like a high chemical industrial environment where most of the organisms out there, well, not most, but there's a lot of pathogens out there. You're breathing that in instead of a soil that's full of health and diversity, and you're breathing in beneficial microbiology. So they have an impact on your overall health. It's just who are you breathing in today? Yeah, and so that for me is quite fascinating. And I think farmers can relate to that. And I think too, just an awareness of, like, even like that idea of the geosmin. So the geosmin means literally the odor of the earth, and the smell of it is like when you're on a hot summer's day and you're driving along and you get a skiff of rain on the road and you smell that smell, which I just adore. But basically what you're smelling is bacterial sex, right? These bacteria are like, just so excited, and you breathe that in, and it actually stimulates a system in our own body that we feel good. But we can smell the geosmin 200,000 times the concentration than what a shark can smell a drop of blood in a swimming pool. So you think about how dilute that is, and scientists have no idea why we can smell this compound at such tiny, tiny, tiny amounts. But I believe it's because that's where we came from, and it has such a relationship with us and with our own well-being. Yeah, so I think the scientific community's, you know, revealing more and more of these relationships to the importance of soil to our own health and well-being.
It's like we have a superpower, but we don't even understand that we have it or why.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've actually got into the habit of eating a little bit of soil because it's going to be better than any probiotic you could buy. You know, from good healthy soil in a forest, just take it, just a little teaspoon, half a teaspoon, put it in your smoothie. But yeah, it's inoculating with far more beneficial organisms than a packaged product.
It's just amazing, isn't it? It's incredible. And all of these concepts, and relating these to, you know, talking to the people that are working the land and have the power to make these changes for all of us, so that our earth is healthier and our food is better for us. A lot of this, I think, comes down to language. So this is a gap that I could see you trying to bridge in your book, where there's the scientific language and all the research that's been done and the facts, but then the way that it's delivered. Do you think that there's a way to, you know, even to have a common language, something that's more understandable?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I think it's unfortunate just how the scientific community structured itself in a lot of ways is through the separation by language and using jargon to kind of have, here's the scientific community and you don't understand anything we're saying. even though the work that they're doing is really impactful for human health or farming, no one can understand what you're talking about. And so it's kind of, for me, what I'm really passionate about is that linkage between the scientific community and the people with the boots on the ground in terms of how do we communicate with each other. And I've had conversations with scientists that have been like, we don't need to learn farmers' language, they need to learn ours. And I'm like, no, hang on, you're doing this work for the farming community, you've got to speak their language. And I don't know if it's always possible, particularly when you look at probably the level of savants or people on the spectrum that are in the scientific community, that actually maybe that kind of communication isn't very easy for them. And so I think that's where the role of extension and storytellers is, and why there's such a need, for extension people and for us to be telling the stories and putting it into simple language, not simple language like dumb, but simple language like in terms of, I think I used one word in the book, which was entomopathogenic fungi, and it's like, that's just not going to roll off most people's tongues, right? No. So, but ento means insect, and pathogen, which I used to think was disease. Pathogen, it comes from pathos, which means suffering. So it's basically insect suffering. So these fungi that basically kill insects, like the ones that I was talking about exploding everywhere. And so there is this language, and then go, okay, what does that mean? Oh, it's a fungus that infects insects. Cool, that's all you need to know. You don't need to have all of that language. We just need to look at how do we apply that, whatever that is, in our own context. Yeah. But yeah, the words are really interesting to me, and thinking about where words came from. Like, I recently Googled what's the Latin word for colonization, and I was surprised to find that it comes from the Latin word colere, which means to cultivate or to till. And so by extension, what they're talking about is to inhabit, but it meant to break land in. That's what we did with colonization, was the coming in and breaking up of land. And that was kind of like a different way of looking at that whole concept of colonization. And yeah, I'm just really interested in words, and then, yeah, what are they really carrying? Because there's a power, I guess, with words, or where a word came from, yeah, that it carries into the future. Yeah.
And then making it accessible, because I know that you write about, I think his name is Dr. Johnson. Is it Dr. Johnson, who was the fantastic listener?
The listener.
Listener. And you met him with his wife, and you geeked out at a function.
Oh, Dr. David Johnson and Chris, Yeah, Dr. David Johnson, we had so much fun. Yeah, he is a very good listener. Yeah, it's quite challenging actually. You want him to talk more, and yeah, it's a rare trait these days. I think I might have written that. You know, I'm not saying it's male scientists, but yeah, you can just be in spaces where there's just not great listening happening. And so it's incredible, nice to be around people that do.
Yeah, I could tell that you liked him in the book. And I want to ask you another question, but for anybody who's just joined, we're talking to Nicole Masters about her book, For the Love of Soil, which is our book for our book club at the Global Evergreening Alliance this time. Also, everybody, feel free, if you have any questions for Nicole, just pop them in, and she can answer them for you. There's going to be time. But in the meantime, the question that I've been wanting to come back, obviously, I'm obsessed about the story with you and your horse. I was wondering if you could tell us. I know it also ties in with the work that you were doing, so I haven't gone off topic. I haven't left soil.
Yeah, I haven't. This behind me, this is the first house I've lived in for 5 years. And I just moved in a month ago, and yeah, really thanks to COVID. So for the last 5 years, I've just lived out of a suitcase and my horse trailer when I'm in the US. So it's been kind of like combining my greatest pleasure, which is natural horsemanship and low stress animal handling with my work, really. So, it's been fantastic to be able to go and visit ranches, do a couple of days work or some workshops, and then to be able to go and move cows or whatever needs to be done. And I see things differently from horseback. So there's a lot that I see. I think that sometimes I might miss if I was just walking or in a vehicle or something. So yeah, we've had some incredible adventures. We've overheated in some beautiful places. um, yeah, we've been able to be part of just really living and breathing what some people are dealing with. I mean, I tell this story a bit of tongue in cheek, but when I first came to the US in 2013, I spoke at a conference for ranching for profit. There were like 500, 600 ranchers there, and I came down and these guys are like, "Howdy, ma'am," and they take off their cowboy hats, and I was like, "You people are real?" Like, that whole idea of like this Western kind of world of cowboys just seems so like I guess like this fantasy. So when I came here, it was like, oh wow, this is incredible. People are really living in the land and in these landscapes where there's so much wildlife. To come from New Zealand, there's just this sense of silence because so many of our native animals have become extinct. And you just don't see wildlife around like you do here. Like there's antelope and deer. Like there's deer right now camped on my front lawn if the dog will leave them alone. There's elk that come through. We had a dead heifer that was just over there and something pulled it down the ravine. So we don't know if it was a black bear or a mountain lion or what it was. And I'm just like, I just absolutely love it. And yeah, that's part of being able to, I guess, be with my horses. We can go up into the mountains and camp with people. And I don't know, I've just been learning so much and seeing so much that I wouldn't have been able to do without my pony. Yeah.
Do you miss being off the road with him, or do you think you're both kind of having a bit of a break?
I think we probably needed to have some walls for a little while. I'm sure I'll get stir crazy soon. But we've got things we're working on. We've got a couple of courses. So I just released a soil health foundation course, which is about reading your soil. And then I've got curriculum planning that I'm doing right now because I've got 3 courses coming up. And one of them includes a Coach the Coaches school. So a whole nearly year-long course to really train more agroecologists or more regenerative coaches, because this is the biggest missing I see is it can be really daunting for, let's say, conventional farmer to shift to these practices, and they want a little bit of hand holding, and it's really not the people out there. So that course I'm really excited about. But yeah, I don't think that it was that sustainable. Like everyone would be like, you do what? You live like what? Like they find it really hard to understand how I could live out of a suitcase. And it was okay, but I was getting really tired. And yeah, I'm like, why am I so tired? And be like, because you haven't stayed anywhere longer than 3 days for like 6 months. Oh yeah. But yeah, so I think just this is a good recharge.
And the courses that you mentioned, is that just going to be in America, or is that also in Australia and New Zealand?
The coaches will depend on what happens with COVID. And so there'll definitely be one in the US, and the plan will be to have one in Australia and one in New Zealand. So either my team will deliver that or I'll deliver it. There's only 8 days of actually in the field, and then the rest is online. So, in theory, people might have to travel to do 8 days and then do the rest online. But I'm excited because you actually will be able to walk off that course and straight into coaching or consulting role, like if people wanted to, which is cool.
Be amazing. Do people find out about that on your website or by following you on Instagram?
All they did is they just heard it right now. So I haven't released much information until I feel like we're closer to releasing it, because we've been working on it for about 2 years. So yeah, Yeah, I need deadlines. So I actually need people to put pressure on me. So I thought if I start talking about it, people are like, hurry up and release it.
You heard it here.
Yeah, totally.
There was something else that you were working on too that I heard about. Are you still working now on the white paper for the New Zealand government?
Yes, yes, that's quite fun. Yeah, so it's turned into a 300-page document with New Zealand's leading scientists are all kind of working on it, and I've been working on the soil health chapter. Um, yeah, and yeah, hopefully it'll be published this year, if not early next year. So it's great because it really looks at, well, what are the gaps for regenerative agriculture? What are the claims? What's the science behind those claims? And I've actually written something else that I'll probably publish myself because there was so much research that I was coming across that really backs up what farmers were seeing in the field, and that for so long has been anecdotal, and then it's like, whoa, there's all of this research coming out um, behind, let's say, the quorum signals or why seed treatments work. I also came across something that finally explains why we're getting rid of herbicide resistance in regenerative fields. Like, my regenerative farmers do not have herbicide resistance anymore. And they might have been applying 6 herbicide sprays when we started together, and now they apply maybe 1 at half a rate if they're doing that. And yeah, so this paper for me is really exciting. I did the like the dance around the living room when I found it with my dog, and I'm like, oh, I am getting a little stir crazy now. That's my most exciting thing of the day, but yeah, it was really, really cool. Yeah.
So you hold out great hope for New Zealand to show us how it's done.
Well, I think they're looking at about $300 million the government is putting out, I think, for regenerative projects. And they just announced that yesterday. There's big projects happening in New Zealand. And I think being a smaller nation, people can be a little bit more adaptive. And because New Zealand already kind of has this bit of a, clean green image, that there's an extra branding opportunity, I think, that New Zealanders can see. And New Zealanders are proud of their landscapes and their stewardship. And I think the awareness of what's happening with water quality and soil losses is probably, raised the alarm bells for a lot of farmers. So I think that personal want and will is there. And, the discussion groups that are happening in New Zealand are just massive. And, between cropping to dairy farmers and sheep and beef are all kind of getting on board in a big way. So, yeah, it's a shame this didn't happen 5 years ago because I would have stayed in New Zealand. But yeah, now that I've left, it's kind of hard to go back. Yeah.
The horse probably doesn't want to go.
No, it wouldn't fit my luggage very well. No.
I just saw a question come in from Greer. So here's questions already about your mentoring course. What kind of pre-experience do you need?
Ideally, we're looking for people that will have potentially an agronomy, like done at least 3 years of agronomy, or they might have just a bachelor's in some kind of science, or they may have had at least 3 years of regenerative farming experience. So either the experience or the science background, and then we'll fill in the gaps for wherever people are at. But yeah, if you're new to regenerative agriculture, this would not be the course for you. Like, it really is for people that have got a bit more, experience under their belt. And we will do other courses for people that this is kind of a new concept. But if you're wanting to get into the consulting, you've really got to come from a grounding of experience. Yeah.
Well, hopefully that's Greer. I hope that's Greer's background.
And if not, you've got a bit of time, so get out there and get some experience. Yeah.
And learn now. Well, I'm still waiting to see if any more questions come through, because I had a final question for you, but it's quite a big one, so maybe I might go with that.
There is a question here from Katerina. She was saying,
what was one thing you didn't expect when you were writing the book?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I think I talk about it in the last chapter, was how I was, I came at it thinking about, more about what the practices were and what to do. And what really came out was how much has changed people's entire lives. Like, they talk about pre-regenerative and post-regenerative in terms of stress levels, in terms of how they see the world, in terms of family relationships, and it just blew me away. And it was a topic that came up with every single person I interviewed, was how much less stress they had in their lives, how much more fun they were having, how much more creative they felt about agriculture, and how they really felt like actually they were fulfilling on that purpose. If you look at, I think it's a TED talk talking about what is it that makes people want to stay in a job or stay with work, and they talk about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And those three things come through so clearly with regenerative agriculture. As you really, farmers are autonomous because they are, at the end of the day, you're the one that making the decisions. But you can become incredibly masterful at what we're doing, and you are fulfilling a purpose that's so much bigger than, I've just got to grow some grain to feed cows or ethanol or whatever. It becomes, I'm growing nutrient-dense food. I'm changing my weather patterns. We're cleaning up waterways. It was so inspiring. I had moments where I just felt really, really emotional about the whole thing, in terms of this is making such an impact on people's lives and on their kids' lives and people around them, that, it was so inspiring.
I think you talked in your book, I can't remember his name. I think he grew apples and pears, but changing his practices led to a move from smoking and alcohol to yoga.
Yeah. And no one, if you met this guy, no one would have ever predicted that. Like, it, and I think that's probably what's coming out of COVID for people too, is around self-care. But realize it, it's this whole thing about realizing you're not separate from your landscapes, and the people that I see have extraordinary results with their landscapes are also the ones that, they're eating well, have good mental health, that it's that whole package. It's really cool.
And I think we had a question from Georgie as well in the chat. What do you think is the greatest barrier to achieving scale in transitioning people from the more conventional practices to those that are resilience-based?
Yeah, really good question, Georgie. Hey, Greg, just joined. It's quite interesting because it was actually the topic for my master's thesis that I didn't finish. So I feel really passionate about it. And I think what I kind of uncovered really was the biggest barriers are really the structural barriers, unfortunately, which can be, debt loading, the banks, accountants, the current agronomists, the supply chain. All of those mechanisms that hold up and support farmers right now are geared for them not to take up a regenerative program. And so what's exciting for me is seeing some of the changes that's happening in Australia and New Zealand with the banks. So there's a SAFI program, so that it's just, I'm talking about it before it's been released, but basically the banks in New Zealand are looking at green bonds, whereby if you can show evidence or demonstrate that you are improving your natural resources, your ecosystem services, soil health, then actually you would have access to these low interest loans. And I think that things like that are incredibly helpful in terms of being able to shift, because right now if people have so much debt and they're so stressed, and they showed actually that level of stress that a lot of farmers are on, it drops people's IQ, just stress in general, drops your IQ by about 14 points. It also limits our ability to take any risk for what seems risky, and to think outside the box. Like, that all becomes harder and harder when you're in these flight or fight phases, which is why often when I'm working with farmers, we really suggest that they go and do some of these personal and professional development programs that really train people in order to how do I make some of these decisions, and how do I weigh up what might be a perceived risk, and actually what is true risk, and what's not. So I think the more that we can get either mentors out there, working alongside farmers that are already further along the track, or hiring a consultant or someone like that that can help people with their confidence, and then certainly educating. We're trying very hard to educate like the research centres and the scientists and those that currently provide education, because again, they're not geared up for regenerative space. It's very much the chemical input mentality. So we are seeing those structures shift and shift rapidly. I see in Vancouver, they've just released an announcement for a $1.2 billion regenerative agriculture centre that's going to be built in Vancouver, to educate and train farmers in Canada, which is incredibly exciting. And that's an initiative driven by the government. So I think we're going to see that, and we're going to see more consumer signals for these are the market, we're willing to pay more maybe, or we really want these clean foods, nutrient-dense foods, and I think that's going to be a big driving factor as well. So you're seeing so much doing this at the moment, from McDonald's to Cargill's to General Mills to you name it, are now all jumping on board with the regenerative shtick, which they're probably greenwashed and have it mean nothing fairly quickly. But unfortunately, what it does show, though, is that there's more support and hopefully more help for farmers to reduce some of their chemical inputs.
A lot of the time in your stories, it does seem to tie back to government support, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I guess it depends. Different countries obviously have different things going on. I mean, you look at the American farming system here, or the American welfare state. They'll hate me saying that. But yeah, you have mechanisms that basically keep this paradigm working, going, even though it doesn't work. So we're going to subsidise and pay farmers even if they had a failed crop or whatever degradation they're doing to their land. And I think New Zealand has that opportunity by not having subsidies. Yeah.
Cool. Well, again, to everybody, if you've just popped in, and some people have, we're talking to Nicole Masters, who's the author of, it's taking me longer to pick the book up this time because the cat sat on it while I had it down there, For the Love of Soil by Nicole Masters, where we're just about up to our 45 Instagram minutes, and I think it stops us after 45 minutes. So I've got a final question for you, Nicole.
Mm-hmm.
The final chapter in your book is called The Future Is Now.
Yep.
So I was just wondering, how do you think the future's going?
Really good. Yeah. Yeah. In my world, it just looks incredible. It looks amazing. Where I'm sitting right now, we calculated over 50% of the land area in this region, and we need to figure out how broad that goes, is now running regenerative programs. And that's happened in the last 6 years. So we're just seeing an incredible movement. The regenerative certifications that are coming out, New Zealand Merino project, which I'm sure I still haven't seen anything public. I keep talking about it and they're not talking about it. I'm going to get in trouble. But yeah, just seeing an incredible groundswell. So for me, I think it's very positive. And I think particularly in these times of doom and gloom, climate change and fires and all the things that we're dealing with out here, and how it's getting harder and harder to grow food, is to see the positivity. It's just so fantastic. And yeah, I feel really good where we are, and the people that are coming together.
That's good, strong words to finish on. It's good. The future's looking bright then. Future
is bright. The future is now.
Yeah. Yes. Super. Yes. It has been such a delight talking to you, Nicole. This has been really, really great. And we're rapt that you were able to join us despite all these time differences. If people want to get in touch with you after this, if anybody has any questions for you, what's the best way for them to do that?
I'm really hard to get hold of. Intentionally. If people are interested in workshops, then we can certainly have conversations. But being able to field questions on emails, I'm just not keeping up with it. And I know you know, I know some amazing people like Gabe Brown. He actually answers people's emails, but I really struggle to. It feels like an unwieldy beast. But yeah, please sign up for the newsletter. So integritysoils.co.nz, and we put out, you know, every 2 weeks we're writing content, blogs, and yeah. What'd you say?
Wave it here and ask sweetly.
Super sweetly. Yeah, no. Yeah, I don't know. I'm very envious of people that can keep up with emails these days. But yeah,
No, I think maybe if people just go to your website and sign up to your newsletter, that would be the best idea. Then they'll know when your courses are coming out. And don't feel bad about Gabe. He didn't answer my email.
Oh, yeah. But yes, I am doing in-house training. So if anyone wants to do stuff by Zoom, we are offering that at the moment. So I'm doing that for a few organizations at the moment. It's been a lot of fun. Yeah, so we can't get together in person, but we can still do good training sessions. All right, I really appreciate everyone taking the time. I know you're busy, so thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. And thanks for everybody else who came along and listened and asked questions. Been fantastic.
Very good.
Thanks, Nicole. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.